So you should have been notified. I think that we're recording now. So yeah, and as I say, please do put any questions in the chat as we go. So by way of introduction, so just a little bit about open research at Leeds. I know we've got colleagues from not just Leeds but elsewhere, and many of us are working in the same sort of direction, looking at research culture generally, and open research and open science in particular. Please do mute as well. I think I can hear somebody coughing, if you don't mind. I'm easily distracted at the best of time. So at Leeds, open research encompasses open access, open and fair data, open platforms, tools and services, an open approach to conducting research, transparency and public engagement are the sort of 5 areas that we've identified as being part of the open research theme. And again, really interested in different, approaches to open research or open science, and I know we're all sort of trying to collaborate on that, and that's part of what this event is about. Other components of it at Leeds include things like responsible metrics. So I know a colleague, Professor Alan Hay was here. He chaired for a while the group we had looking at responsible metrics, and that's closely related to a lot of this stuff in terms of not relying on general impact factor and trying to share the full range of research outputs and that kind of thing, and generally underpins the research culture. So there's an illustration there of our research culture themes, one of which is open research and impacts, and obviously that's also closely related to things like EDI and responsible research and innovation. So that's kind of the context we're coming from. And then, as I'm sure many colleagues will also relate to elsewhere at other universities and also here at Leeds, there's a question for us, I think, as practitioners, especially people in roles like myself, who, frankly, I've got a bachelor's degree in English, which means I can read, so I don't know my French history from my electron microscopy and, a big research institution. And obviously the issues around open vary widely, whether it's in the STEM disciplines, which tends to perhaps inform a lot of the discussion historically around open science, and that's why we tend to use the term open research to be a bit more inclusive of the arts and humanities. What even is data in the arts and humanities? It's not just numbers, as it might tend to be in STEM. So even articulating that can be a challenge. And then in the social sciences, there's another range of issues, so things like preregistration, which has come originally from psychology, but could potentially be related to a wide other range of other disciplines. I've spoken to colleagues in different disciplines. Some aren't aware of it at all. Some, are starting to explore it in different disciplines. So it's just trying to understand how open relates to all these, different contexts and interdisciplinarily as well, so that different disciplines can work from each other. Take again the arts and humanities, is reproducibility even a thing in arts and humanities? Does it make sense? As I say, I'm not a researcher, and I'm sure colleagues will have different views on that. So there's all these types of questions that we're trying to sort of understand as we explore, what open research really means. Digital humanities is an important area of arts and humanities research, and again, we've just had a conversation with colleagues prior to this, the Turing Way. I don't know if Sophia Batchelor did make it here. She was just presenting on that, and we were asking, a little there about, I think that tends to be STEM focused, but then trying to sort of think about how that might relate to things like the digital humanities, and non-computational research or research that's not traditionally computational, that kind of thing. And also, I've emphasised there as well, open and fair data, but especially in, perhaps the social sciences, where you might be dealing with human-derived data, perhaps that can't be open, but it can be fair. So, I think the very terminology of open can be problematic as well. So there's all these different issues that we're trying to tackle, I think, as a university and as a sector. So in terms of this project that Chris and Dorka will be talking to you about, this came from funding that, again, it was funding that many other colleagues from the universities will have received as well, to enhance research culture from Research England. So we had an allocation by the Research Culture Group here at Leeds to look at improving some of the aspects of open research. So one of the things we wanted to look at was was open research case studies. Just to mention some of the other things we've been looking at as well as things like citizen science, open education, we're doing a lot on that. Again, there's lots of interrelated aspects to this. Funding for things like the DOAJ and the DOAB, if you don't, that's the Directive of Open Access Journals, the Directive of Open Access Books, so making sure that people can actually publish fully openly without necessarily having to pay huge open access fees, APCs and that kind of thing. And we've done a Wikimedia pilot project as well with the Faculty of Biological Sciences, FBS. So there'll be more information forthcoming around that, including poems. We actually commissioned some poems for that as well. So there's been lots of interesting stuff going on, funded by this work. Today, of course, we're talking specifically about the case studies. So before I hand over to Chris and Dorka, I just wanted to highlight that there is another call that some of you may have been aware of. There is still plot time before the deadline tomorrow. And one of the aspects that UKRN and Research England are interested in particular is open research studies and collaborating on them. And I was actually having a conversation with Neil Jacobs yesterday, who people may be aware of, is the head of UKRN the UKRN Open Research Programme. Unfortunately, he couldn't be here today. I think he's busy elsewhere. But he did say, I could mention the conversation and the fact that he's very interested in collaborating with us and with other universities on case studies, potentially to build, say, a national showcase of open research case studies across different disciplines, which is what we're trying to do. And finally, I just want to sort of finish with a bit of an apology, really. I mean, I don't want to make excuses, but in terms of the way this project was run, it was very short term. There was perhaps a little bit of naivety on my part in terms of, expecting people to be happy with sharing their practice. Of course, we're talking about people's professional practice that's developing, and people may or may have not been welcome, entirely happy to share that openly. Our timescales were a little bit short, and our communications perhaps went a little bit awry. So recently, I know there's a few colleagues here today who got an email from me saying, let us know if you're not happy with your stuff being shared CC by. And due to the perhaps lack of communication you'd had, just to the time issues, people were understandably, well, hang on, I want to see it, etc. So just to reassure people that we won't be sharing anything without explicit permission. And again, I did discuss this with Neil as well, and he was sort of saying they're working on case studies, and many are actually being shared anonymously for this reason, because people aren't necessarily, comfortable with having their material shared openly. But again, just really a big thank you to everybody that has taken part. I know Chris and Dorka have done an awful lot of work and talked to a lot of people over the past few months. Their contract was, as I say, very short term, and it was due to finish last week. We've actually managed to extend, and we're hoping to do a lot more work around this. But as I say, just a big thank you to those that have already participated. Especially, another aspect is, I know it's taken up a lot of people's time as well. So again, just to acknowledge that and to hopefully we've got some good stuff out of this that we'll be working on over the next few months. And finally, just really to emphasize that Neil's, did suggest, maybe one area of collaboration could be around a how-to guide. How can we actually put these things together? I don't know, model consent forms, making sure, there's a methodology that Chris and Dorka will talk a little bit about around now, and really just an invitation from us and from UKRN and more generally, I think, in the spirit of collaboration, to collaborate on some of these things going forward. So with that, I will hand over to, are you going to go first, Dorka?
I think Chris was scheduled first, but I don't know.
I don't mind, sorry. Sorry, Chris, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I can go first, yeah. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine. So I'll pass over to you if you don't mind. I did actually have I'll just introduce you a little bit. So Chris, you're still doing your PhD, aren't you? Actually, you haven't quite finished your PhD.
Yeah, it's just never ending.
At Exeter. So I mean, another point in this, and I think you'll talk about, Chris, is that all of this has been remote. But neither Chris or Dorka are actually in Leeds. Although you are an alumnus, aren't you, Chris? I think you were at Leeds previously, but you've done everything remotely.
Yeah, I did my
own your PhD at the Institute for Arab and Islamic Studies at Exeter, I think. But anyway, I'll pass over to you and let you share your slides. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Can someone let me know if they can see that? Okay, please.
Yeah, we can.
Yeah, I can see that.
All right. Right, there we go. So yeah, so thanks for that, Nick. And thanks for the intro and everything. So I mean, mainly today, what I'm going to be sort of talking about is sort of our experiences in terms of doing this project. So in terms of like the sort of steps we've taken, what we've learned, sort of the experiences overall, and sort of show off 2 case studies that that I've been working on. So I mean, sort of coming into this role, really, my knowledge about OR, open research was indeed quite limited, mainly sort of just related to open access and fair data. However, sort of the underlying premise and nature of it is something that I've always been in favour of, in terms of like trying to make research more transparent and for it to have those, for lack of a better word, real world impact, so better connectivity outside the academic realm. But throughout the course of my PhD at Exeter, there was sort of very limited exposure and awareness. There wasn't much by way of training, seminars, workshops around open research, but it was always sort of there lingering in the background, as in people had always heard of it, and it had some ideas like open access, being like the main one. So this role offered a great opportunity to sort of enhance my own knowledge and experiences with it, really, and sort of generally learn more. So by way of sort of like the step-by-step process of what we went through, there's a sort of bit of a quick run through. So Dorka and I started this role back in mid-May, and what we did for the first few weeks really was sort of familiarise ourselves more with the open research practice. So doing a lot of secondary research, attending workshops, seminars, open lunches, conferences, and so on, to sort of get more of a feel of the sort of overall state of open research in UK academia, but also the different sort of practices and implications, ideas and debates. So what we did from there, well, we did this really early on, is sort of split up the faculties because we wanted a good spread across the whole of Leeds University. So there's a list there that sort of details how we've done that. So Dorka took on some and I took on others. And we've sort of been trying to sort of get a good spread, so that of what open research means and how it's sort of transpired, if you will, across different disciplines. So from that, we would sort of look at researchers' profiles, project profiles, to identify what looks like sort of good open research, potential open research cases. But alongside that, we sort of, through our secondary research, we sort of drew up an extensive list of potential questions of inquiry. So like for whether in terms of generally open research of the concept, but also questions along the lines of like the specific practices we identified. And as a result, when it came to doing interviews and the lead up to interviews, we'd sort of create bespoke questionnaires, sort of with the questions sort of fine-tuned for what we thought would be the best things to ask about to us researchers and projects. So we reached out to people and we found an information sheet which detailed what it was we were doing, and of course a consent form to sign those, which went off without a hitch. Really, it was quite easy to do. So from there, we sort of arranged 1 hour interview slots, but in my experience, they tended to last about 40 to 50 minutes, and most were done. I mean, I did virtually all mine via Teams. I think Dorka as well. I mean, I remember I did one via Zoom at the request of the interviewee. And from that, we secure the data securely on the OneDrive, and there we sort of transcribed them. And from there, we sort of planned and drew up the case studies on MS Sway based on the interview responses. And after that, of course, send it to each interviewee for their approvals, seeing if what we were saying was correct, if they wanted anything changing, if they wanted anything sort of removing, or if they wanted anything adding. So and therefore after that, making necessary revisions, which I'm still very much in the process of doing at the moment. So yeah, so in terms of that, so there's 2 case studies here, and just to sort of clarify, these are case studies that have both been approved by the respective people we interviewed. As Nick said, we're not going to share anything that hasn't been passed by and approved by the respective interviewee. So I mean, the first one really, so I'll bring this up now, is the peat map by June Zhu from Physical Geography, which was a particularly interesting case study. That's not, is it? Sorry, can someone tell me if that's opened?
No, I think you got the same issue we had yesterday, Chris.
Yeah, we got a
slides.
Yeah, so hang on, I'll just stop sharing and. So how do you share sort of generally,
you just need to share your whole screen, I think, rather than a window. It is a bit
Oh,
confusing.
Right, sorry, yeah.
You got it.
Again,
No, you just got your slides.
no, yeah, I need to come out. I think I need to come out of the.
If you post a link in chat, I can share it maybe.
Sorry, I'm just trying to. How do you sort of? I'm trying to get out the. There we go. I should do it. Just give it a few seconds, please. But yeah, I mean, as I was saying,
Oh, there you go.
yeah. So we've been using MS Sway for these case studies. I mean, I think we originally sort of toyed with the idea of picture chat, but I believe there were sort of licensing issues, weren't there, Nick, related to that, where it, and I think the main sort of priority really was to sort of get these case studies written up and sort of worry about the aesthetics and sort of how it might look later. I don't know why that isn't going to full screen. I don't know why it's a full screen.
Just double click on the top of your browser thing. We can see it anyway, Chris.
I'm terribly sorry about this. I don't know where.
Don't worry. There's always technical issues.
Yeah, so I mean, is it okay if I just leave it like that? Because I don't know
it's fine. We can see it.
Right, yeah, so I mean, this is an example of a case study we've done, which was particularly interesting because I mean, it's something that I've no sort of familiarity with whatsoever, really, in terms of geography. So I mean, and that's one of the things I'll go and talk about in a bit. That another sort of aspect that's been enjoyable about this whole project has been you sort of immerse yourself, because I mean, a common term you come across is being siloed in your own discipline. So it's great to sort of immerse yourself in different research practices and how different people sort of perceive and conduct research. So yeah, this was done by Duran Zoo, and what I used to do is start off with quite a general question where we ask what does open research mean to you. So for Duran, it meant more about sort of transparency, making data available, making papers available, so open access, and then usually sort of jump into the project, the main sort of project that had been identified for open research. So we'd sometimes use details from the sort of one of the Leeds library websites, profile for the project. So this information is taken from one of the Leeds sites, and then we sort of then talk into the account and go over how they thought open research was used and practiced. And so yeah, I mean, Duran goes into aspects like fair data being a major thing, so the reproducibility element. Open access in terms of the papers he's produced, as well as sort of the software he's used to try and get this the peat map, which is a map for the global distribution of peatland, to sort of make it more accessible for others to use. So I mean, we will talk about the project and sort of like different aspects of open research that seem to correspond to it. But we'd also sort of then move on to sort of more general questions, so like what his views were on the state of open research in geography more widely. And he said that, for example, it's a growing trend, but there does still need to be more awareness and perhaps more sort of training. And we also talked about other open research practices, maybe not necessarily related to the peat map, but things that the researcher, so in this case, Duran, engaged with. So in this case, we talked about preprints and how he did one for nature climate change last year. We also talked about public engagement, where he kindly shared a Twitter feed to where he presented the peat map at the COP26 climate conference in Glasgow. So generally, yeah, it's been sort of a very sort of both structured as both a sort of specific look at OR with regard to researchers and specific projects, but also more broadly on their sort of views and experiences with other research practices. So I mean, that's one example. I'll bring up the next one. I'm not sure if Kelly's here. She said she'd try to stop by. I'm not sure.
She is. I think she came in. Yeah.
Oh, brilliant. Yeah. So I mean, this is another one. It's quite interesting. So I mean, just to point out that when we were doing this, we weren't just sort of looking for what you might call sort of fully fledged academic researchers. We're also very much interested in learning from PhD students as well, PhD candidates, which Kelly is, about their experiences, because sort of one of the drives behind open research is to make it's sort of more accessible and more people more aware of it early on. So I mean, obviously, doing your PhD and introducing open research at that level is sort of a good inception point. So I mean, with this one, we sort of talked more generally about not about a specific project as such, but sort of the different practices that Kelly had experience with, so her experience with it in views. So in particular for Kelly, we talked about sort of preprints and open access, and she sort of a pre-registration, and she said that preprints, for example, were a major benefit for her PhD research. We also talked about her PhD research in terms of you know, what she was doing. So she was looking at the sort of sorry, I've just lost track of it. Sort of, yeah, so investigating the facilitators and barriers using aspirin for colorectal cancer prevention. So we talked a bit about that and how sort of because for her the PhD is ongoing. So we'll talk about her sort of ongoing experiences and sort of aims when it came to open research. So she talked a lot about hoping to make things open access and fair. And another thing we should point out is that we didn't just contact researchers to talk about their research and projects. We also wanted to learn about sort of different facilities that help sort of facilitate open research at Leeds, for which there's quite an abundance. So Kelly is a lead and very much involved in the reproducibility, which is a journal club at Leeds. They're all over the country, but the one at Leeds is particularly prominent from what I've seen by all the events they've held. So we discussed more about what that was and how it sort of tried to foster open research debate, especially among PGR, so PhD students, which was also very, you know, very interesting and very informative as well. And of course, you know, got some Twitter link feeds to sort of help people if you want to learn more, sort of explore that more, because for Kelly, social media is such a big dissemination device that not only can you disseminate research, but it's good for debate, and that's become a major tool in that regard. So yeah, so those are a couple of examples. I mean, so sort of just to sort of move on really into sort of the main sort of findings that we came across. So one of the key findings was sort of predictory really, is that open research means different things to different people. So within disciplines or in terms of methodological approaches, so whether it's qualitative or quantitative. There does seem to be a greater presence and engagement with numerous research practices in STEM over social sciences, for example, in terms of the variety. So in social sciences, most people I asked when we talked about it, it was either sort of one or the other. It was open access and public engagement, or open access and open education. Whereas in the more STEM-based subjects, there was a whole raft of engagement among individual researchers, like so open software, preprints, pre-registration, sort of a wide variety. But the key underlying elements that most people sort of perceive as open research was the transparency element. So the idea of making research, the whole process open, and of course, the dissemination of results and data for others to access and use. And crucially, not just within the academic setting, so trying to overcome the sort of ivory tower stereotype that academia has long had. So public engagement or engaging more with external stakeholders was another big drive in that regard. So OR awareness has increased a lot over the past 3 or 4 years, they'll say. But they also think, a lot of people said that they thought they could do with more awareness and specifically training on how different practices could relate to their own research and how they could engage with it along such lines. But of course, again, OI is such a vast area that encompasses loads of different practices and different concepts. So it's not just about open access and making data fair. It's also about public engagement and opening up the education process, and of course, so about sort of the co-production of knowledge. So I mean, just sort of finally, really, just sort of about the experiences. And overall, with the time that we've had, I think we've done quite well. We've got a good spread across different disciplines. You know, loads of different insights. Good coverage of all the different practices and how they're being used. However, of course, with all things, there have been some challenges. So, for example, some schools and disciplines were easier to access than others. You know, it was easier to get a hold of and to sort of gauge interest from different areas more so than others. And sort of in terms of my own sort of personal capacity, I do have my own limits. So I came into this not as an expert of open research. So it could be quite sort of challenging and weird sometimes, where if you're asking a question in an interview and the interviewer didn't know what you were talking about, it could be quite hard for me to then try and elaborate because I wasn't fully sure myself. And it's been a learning process for us in itself. really in that regard. So I mean, one of the main things that is that one of the struggles, if you will, is that because it was very much a learning process, at times it was hard to produce sort of informative case studies when writing them up, especially in terms of striking the balance between a given case study having like a central theme or two, and it just being a write-up of the responses from the Q&A. And the reason for that is because we had a big spread in terms of the fields that we covered, and you know, I don't want to presume to speak for Dorka, but in terms of my experience, my background is qualitative political science, so it would be hard to write up a case study about something in geography or psychology result. And of course, we did try to do sort of research around it to sort of try and contextualize the case studies, but of course, with limited time, there's only so much we can sort of hone our skills in on different disciplines. So I mean, that was sort of a bit of a challenge. So yeah, the time consuming aspect, you know, it being only 4 months, was a hindrance in that regard. So fortunately, with this extension, it gives us a bit more breathing space to sort of revisit the case studies and sort of amend them and adapt them a bit. So yeah, and of course, on a more general note, you know, this has been very much like an experimental undertaking. I mean, as far as I know, nothing like this has been done at Leeds before. So it's, you know, everything's sort of been new to us. So it's sort of been trying to find our footing really, and we still are to a degree. So yeah, and of course, last but not least, this, as Nick mentioned, Dorka and I have been doing this remotely, so completely from home, via Teams, you know, online. And the problem with that is there can always be technical issues. So where I am, I had a problem where for 2 weeks we kept having power cuts and Wi-Fi blackouts, which kept sort of disrupting it and having to rearrange interviews. So I mean, I apologise on behalf if anyone here has been affected by that, but unfortunately it's just one of those issues that you can't really resolve. But overall, I mean, I'm still working on the case study. So I mean, if you haven't heard back from me yet, you will in the next few days or next week. I mean, you know, I'm sort of trying to make sure they're done properly. So I'm sort of taking my time a bit with them. Of course, I'm part-time now, so that lessens the time. So I do apologise in advance for that. But yeah, overall, it's been a good experience. And thank you for listening to me ramble on. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Chris. I'll hand straight over to you, Dorka. Please do post any questions as we go.
Do you need me to unshare or?
Yeah. I think you need to stop sharing first.
Right.
Yeah.
And sorry if anybody got somebody just started drilling near me, so I'll manage to mute quite quickly.
Okay, can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So some of the things that Chris said, I will just echo. So I don't know, I will probably skip through some of that. So some of you are external participants, and you might wonder what are open research case studies. And I wondered about that when I started this job. So initially, how we started as well, this project is we looked at other universities that have conducted open research case studies. So these are screenshots from University of Sheffield, University of Surrey, and University of Reading. And you can see that their way of doing case studies is all very different. Some of them are just text-based, some of them, the Reading ones, if you click on the individual sort of windows, then I think they come up as PDFs with images. And some of them really, what I struggled with when I looked at these case studies, they seem to be quite scientific in the language. So if you're not from that field of area of research, then you probably can't really understand what the whole particularities of the case studies. So I think one of the things that we try to do at Leeds as well is to make the language of the case studies accessible for everyone, no matter what field you're coming from. And I also find it interesting in terms of just looking at these universities, that none of these are sort of Oxbridge universities. So I don't know if it's something interesting to think about in terms of which universities are the ones that are engaging with open research case studies. So this is something that Chris mentioned, that this project originally was a 4-month project. And we were first, we really just spent the first months on familiarizing ourselves with both the open research landscape and the infrastructure and different system at the University of Leeds, both in terms of you know, when you start a new job, and we have been added to like 10 different types of team groups, and that was also a bit challenging to figure out, you know, which teams groups deals with what and who to contact with, and because I was as well not from Leeds, so familiarizing ourselves with different faculties, different schools, different ways of doing things. And then, as Chris mentioned, that we are establishing contacts or recruiting new participants by looking at different research projects and really just browsing on the website of the University of Leeds' faculties and schools. And there were different stages of interviewing, editing the interview transcript, and then writing up the case studies. So the areas I focused on were the Faculty of Arts and Humanities and Cultures, the Faculty of Biological Sciences, Faculty of Engineering and Physical Sciences, Faculty of Interdisciplinary Research. I also done a case study on the Leeds Special Collections and Open Education. And because I was, so my field of study is English. So the way we also studied the case studies to focus on our sort of quote unquote expertise areas. So I started as well working first in the arts, humanities and cultures, and then kind of making our way through the more difficult STEM subjects as well. Some of the challenges that I came across as well were that one, the duration of the project, which now has been extended. So this gives us some more time to work on the case studies and develop new ones. And I said it took some time to familiarize ourselves with myself with the system and infrastructures at Leeds. And something that, of course, could be, you know, understandable, waiting for potential participants to respond. Sorry about the noise. To respond to emails, and or some people then declined participation and then identify new contacts. So this was kind of that slowed us down in terms of doing the case studies. If we were waiting for people to respond, which of course I understand, and then kind of trying to find new people and then waiting for those as well to respond. And there was obviously a different levels of interest in the case studies by people we approached. Some people were very happy to participate. A lot of you are here as well. Some people are a bit more, I'm not sure, what does this mean? Can you tell me more about it? And then I decide if I want to be included. And then some people couldn't do that because of the time constraint, or they just did not feel that it was relevant to their research. So these are the kind of challenges I came across, and that occurred to me about the technical difficulties. I think I only had one interview where my laptop decided to restart during the interview. So the recording was a bit off, but yeah, this was also kind of challenge as well of doing this remotely. So as Chris has also mentioned, we have we developed an information sheet that we sent out to people, a consent form, and also on the right side you can see our document in which we wrote down kind of structured general questions, and then think about different aspects of open research that we're asking participants. And these are some of the highlights from my experience of the case studies, both from my end and as things as that I took from the academics I interviewed. So I think there's a general knowledge of open research across disciplines, although this is also a biased point of view because the people who participated, they were usually the ones who were already interested or knowledgeable of open research. There was a quite clear STEM and humanities divide in terms of what is relevant in the field and what people do, what is the knowledge of different things. And but there was a big variety of approaches to for example, preprints, data sharing. What was kind of more coherent in every field is the awareness of open access, which especially has kind of highlighted since the pandemic. And even if there is people felt that they did not use the correct terminology, many were engaging with different open research practices, even if they did not get the terminology right. Something I also found interesting, the least popular or most difficult question that people found is, what does data mean in your field? Which was a challenge, I think, for everyone to respond to that, especially, I think, people across arts and humanities. There was a general consensus or worry about regarding the cost of open access with the new UKRF policy. So this was something that people shared across arts, humanities, even library services. And something just to echo what Chris said as well. I think the people I interviewed also agreed on that. They want more help and clearer communication in terms of what they could and should do, and clearer guidelines, particularly on a faculty and school level. So this is something that we also communicated to Nick and different aspects of the library services. So hopefully in the future, some things will be done about it. So I wanted to highlight some quotes from the case studies and then show you 2 or 3 of mine, depending on the time. These are just, and if you don't see your name here, it's not because there was anything wrong with the interviews, it's because there were so many case studies. I just tried to highlight some things. I will not read this out loud for you. You can see just a couple of highlights in terms of what people found interesting, what do they think about open research, even just a variety of schools. So in here as well, and I think these slides will be available so you can read this more clearly in terms of what people think about reproducibility, and what people think about accessible research, and how, what sort of things open research can mean as well, and in terms of data sharing. So the case studies I wanted to show you, I think I have it open anyway. I will probably do the stop sharing and then share it again. Just a second. Yeah, can you see that?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is the case study I done with Antonio, who's here, on open education. So a couple of highlights from the interview I done with him is I asked him, how does open education relate to open research? And he said, just this first, I will read a couple of highlights from this paragraph, that he said he sees a connection between research and open education, whether the research is open or not. Research is an activity, a process, and not particularly the goal of the end result. And some of the things that he highlighted in terms of digital accessibility as well, that open education does not mean digital education or digitally available things. And he also focused on some of the things that Leeds is doing. He said, for openness to succeed, we need a combination of ingredients: training, information, processes, incentives, examples of good practice, and time. At the University of Leeds, is embracing openness strategically as part of its mission, which is crucial. If an institution believes in those values and practices, it sends a powerful message to colleagues and students. And just as well highlight at how Leeds is promoting openness, and that also encourages colleagues as well at the Leeds to do that. And I wanted to compare to a couple of answers from the case studies. One from the School of English, from the interview I done with Bridget Bennett, who is also here, and a case study I done with someone from the School of Mathematics, Mauro, who is sadly not here, couldn't make it today. I just wanted to show you the different answers, for example, they gave on what does open research mean to you. So Bridget focused on open access because that's relevant on the field of English, and making publication available without charge. And Mauro, who works in the School of Mathematics and currently works on a collaborative project with American colleagues as well, he highlighted that as well broader access to research, but it also the project that he's currently working on with an international team, they're partly funded by UKRI and an American, the NSF by the States, and the American collaborators are not subject to the same rules as they are in the UK, which poses several questions. For example, which journals we will be able to publish in. Open research is a good idea in principle, but it has many challenges. And just something, for example, that comparing what they said about preprints. Yeah, I asked, do you have any concerns about preprints? He said, no, I don't have any concerns. It has worked well in my field. What can sometimes go out of hand is if people just post anything as preprint. For example, I was concerned when there were tons of preprints about COVID-19 at the beginning of the pandemic, but in my field, this is not the case. And throughout the whole interview, he highlighted how important preprints are in his field, and he also shares preprints with his students. While yeah, this was something that Bridget has done with Nick, which I think it's also important to highlight in terms of open research and what open research can do in a project. This Wikipedia article was developed by Nick in collaboration with working by Bridget's project. So you know, just think about making research accessible and open, and knowledge accessible and open. So for example, Bridget said that I can see how preprints are useful. Though some colleagues publish preprints to get feedback and responses, I don't do this. The White Rose repository is important for us locally for depositing material that is ready for publication. I always want to make sure that whatever I publish is rigorous work. There is value assurance in peer-reviewed papers that is publicly recognized. This is something that Mauro also echoed in about preprints of COVID. It is a quality control process that is not there for preprints. So while she also has a kind of more positive attitude towards preprints, it is maybe not as widespread in the field of English. I think these were my key highlights. But if you're interested in that, I can give you the links for these case studies. I could not see the comments in there, but I will now read the chat as well. And yeah, just thank you for everyone who participated in the case studies. And as I said, if you didn't see your name in one of the quotes, it's not because the case study is not great. I just randomly selected a good variety of people across humanities and STEM subjects.
Great, thanks, Dorka. And we've got 10 minutes left, so I think that was great overview. And you know, as I said, we've tried to be sort of open about the challenges we've faced as well, and it's certainly been a learning experience for us. And as I said at the beginning, you know, trying to work across the sector, and certainly, you know, Research England UK are interested in doing that if anybody else is working in this sort of area. So I don't know if there are any specific questions. I noticed one earlier that Chris answered in the chat from Nick Garrett, who was asking which schools and disciplines in social sciences are harder to access than others. So you said, Chris, I think that in the end, you managed to get stuff from most schools and areas, with the exception of law, perhaps?
Exactly. I mean, I've been trying to sort of snowball contacts in law, but a lot of them have ended up as dead ends. You know, and there was a number of people who sort of sat on sort of their research clusters who, in the end, said, "Oh, I'm sort of you know, leaving this position, and you know, so try and contact this person who might be taking over." So things like that. So another thing we should point out is, as well as the 4-month time frame, I would also say there was a bit of an issue given the time of year we did it. So we encountered a lot of sort of scheduling issues because a lot of people were obviously and naturally, you know, rightly so, going on annual leave, you know, during the summer months, and because we weren't really in a position to do the case studies until about early mid-June, when a lot of people have sort of broken up for the holidays and people were taking leave. So we've had to sort of work our way around that. And in my experience, it's led to me having to sort of like drop some people from interviews because they would say something like, "Oh, I'm not going to be available until October." And obviously, for months we thought that we would only be doing this project until mid-September. But fortunately, hopefully I can revisit those people because it's been extended. So there's hopefully some scope for doing that. But in the end, social sciences, aside from law, yeah, we're able to get a good spread. I've done a couple of case studies with Polis and a couple of education and one with sociology. So yeah.
No, thank you. So just a couple of points there. I mean, if anybody else wants to speak, please put your hand up or just interrupt. I just wanted to pick up on Robin's point, you know, that this issue of bias. and the self-selecting nature of that. And I think that's one of the things we're trying to tackle with this, talking to different people. And I think, I think we've done that to an extent. Alice has got his hand up, in his real hand rather than a virtual hand.
Apologise if I'm interrupted by a tiny human. My question is sort of around, the university has a global HR, has global facilities, right? Why don't we, and we have the health and safety training that's mandatory through BritSafe. And I had this exact same thing with ED&I. Why don't we have a monthly refresher course on that? And just to build on top of what the boys have been saying about, Dorka and the other fellow have been saying about contracts. Researchers are transient. So by the time they've done a few months here, they're on their way out to the next place, which will have a different set of rules. So who's the arbitrary for this? And can we say, like, when you come through the door, can we have the training saying this is Leeds' policy? And I don't think it should be devolved all the way down to faculty level. I think to school level. I think it should probably be faculty level. That's just what's stopping the University of Leeds having open access annual training, like with the display screen equipment, like with the health and safety. That's my question.
I don't know if I could. I don't want to put you on the spot, Kat, but I think you're still here, and does that speak to some of the broader questions around research culture that we're trying to address? And I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that. I have thought that myself, whether or not you could mandate this type of stuff, or maybe we don't necessarily want to mandate it. Sorry, Kat, I don't know if you. I'm asking her now. She might have gone for a brew or something. I think it's a good question, Alistair, and it's not one that I could immediately answer. But I will. I was trying to. I was mentioning to Kat in particular because she's our Dean of Research Culture, so she may have some thoughts on that. But it is something that's occurred to me in the past as well, that you might be able to do a sort of BritSafe type thing, although do you take that much attention to it? I sort of pride myself on doing the fire safety as quick as I can. I'm not sure that necessarily solves the. So sorry, Kat. Thanks, Kat. Sorry to put you on the spot. There was one, just aware of time, but there's a question just coming from Nick there as well. But there's a really interesting one from Charlie. I don't know if we've got the time or the expertise to answer that. I think it's a really good question. It's something I've thought about. So if you're seeing in the chat, Charlie's asking, large data producers, this is symptomatic of the environment we live in, isn't it now, in terms of how it's controlled or not? I mean, think of Cambridge Analytica with Facebook, etc. Amazon, Uber and Facebook, famous for not sharing their data. Is it fair or even sustainable for public research data to be free without an expectation of reciprocity from large private data gatherers? I think that's, perhaps an unanswerable question. I think there's all sorts of issues around that. I certainly wouldn't want to give you a quick answer to that, but I think it's a good question. I don't know if you've got any thoughts, anybody, or Dan. I could put you down, that's your surname, Charlie. Dorka's got.
Yeah, I just wanted to quickly say, because people have their hands up as well, to Nick's question. I mean, Kelly also now answered to that, but also included a quote in the PPT from Hannah. She works in developmental psychology. I think she was here too, saying that in her field, people who access the papers, so it's very important to publish open access, because the people who are directly affected by it are language therapists, speech therapists, teachers. It's not particularly just academics. So in terms of publishing preprints as well and publishing things open access, yeah.
But I do think there's a bigger question there, Charlie, in terms of, for me, of the governance around, the whole information environment. But I think that's a very big question. I'll come to you in a minute, Adam. So you got your question, hands up. But I did just want to pick up on Nick's question there for you and Chris Dorka. Did any academics come up with any evidence of the benefits to society of people accessing their research to OER output? So this is another question we get often. Actually, it's the right thing to do. But is there actually any evidence that it is having the benefits that we sort of ascribe to it, I suppose?
Yeah, I was just going to mention Bridget's example as well, that she mentioned in an interview, which is part of in the case study, that as a result of her research, there will be a blue plaque erected in one of the abolitionist advocates' place, and also she mentioned that in terms of public knowledge. So there is also other ways of disseminating knowledge, not just scholarly publication. I think she mentioned that she wants to do some radio recordings as well, maybe on blog posts and things like that she has been already involved in the past. And I think these are things that a lot of academics do anyway.
And I was, I just mentioned the Wilson Armistead. I'm always talking about because it was as I say, I wrote a Wikipedia article in, but I've presumably, no disrespect to you, Bridget, but more people will see the Wikipedia article than might otherwise access your research, and that's a way of raising that sort of awareness. So I think just on an awareness level, but yeah, I don't know. So Adam, did you have a question or a comment?
I just got two really quick comments. The one is the interesting stuff that's going on in the US about mandating open from the White House Office of Science and Technology. There's been some really interesting articles about that and about how that seems to be surfacing some of the costs of publishing and the costs of openness, and how the kind of like costs of APCs and stuff has really been kind of surfaced by that policy. So some of the actual kind of underlying costs of the infrastructure are coming to light through that policy. And I think if people like look at some of the blog posts and scholarly kitchen and so on articles around that, and people on Twitter who follow Sam or can find that kind of thing. And the other thing, just to say, from the work that we've been doing with Pure Voices, at Pure Voices on Twitter, is that on the kind of openness versus fair on research and research culture, where the work kind of intersects with kind of not just research in the academe, but research and researchers that also have some kind of commercial interest. There's been a real kind of discussion that we've been having with people about how appropriate it is for their outputs to actually be open. It's not just the giant companies, but there are some people who are, trying to make a living out of this stuff. And although they are doing research, they are also trying to do something which is a commercial business as well. So there are products that are research, but there are also stuff that
there's certainly a tension there. I mean, we in the research data team, we will refer people to the commercialization part of the university. There's a tension there. We say make everything open, and they say no, we need to. You can make money out of it, and IPs and patents and that kind of thing. So there's ways of managing it, but there's
and I think that's a great, because as open as possible is and slash fair. Has always been kind of that discussion around that. I think that's really interesting, both from the kind of research culture point of view, but from the kind of practicality and pragmatic approach to this stuff as well.
Yeah.
Amanda.
I'm conscious of time. I'm going to stop the recording just because we are just about at time. I mean, I don't have to rush away immediately, and if anybody